My name is Isabel Monroe, 30 years old. And right now, I'm sitting backstage at the International Women's Leadership Conference where, in just a few minutes, I'll walk onto the main stage, hold the microphone, and say something I once believed I would never get the chance to say out loud. The right wing of the stage is slightly open, and through the slit in the curtain, I can see a small corner of the main hall. And in that moment, I see her, Lily, my younger sister. The one who, 2 years ago, stood in the middle of our mother's birthday party, raised her wine glass, and laughed. That's just how my sister is the family's biggest disappointment. 47 people were there that day, 47 eyes turned to me. No one burst out laughing, but no one spoke up in my defense either. Not even my parents. It was a silent agreement, as if what she said was simply the truth, just something no one had dared to say aloud until then. Now, Lily has just stepped into the auditorium, holding a small notebook, walking with the same gentle confidence she always had. She has no idea that I'm the one about to open today's conference, the keynote speaker of the biggest event of the year. She's here to take notes, to listen to inspiring women, talk about overcoming judgment, about being underestimated and daring to rise. She doesn't know that one of those women is me. She doesn't know that the woman stepping out in just a few minutes is the very sister she cast into the shadows 2 years ago. I tighten my grip on the mic. It's slightly slippery, not because my hand is wet, but because I'm still shaking. Not from fear, but because I am standing in a moment I've imagined in my mind hundreds of times over the past 2 years, and now it's real. I don't need revenge. I don't need to humiliate her. I don't need to shout or justify myself. I just need to walk out, tell my story, and let the truth speak for itself. 2 years ago, I was the family's disappointment. Today, I am the keynote speaker. If you've ever been humiliated publicly by someone you love, if you've ever sat in a crowd and felt completely invisible, if you've ever wondered, do I even deserve a place in this family? Stay with me. I'll tell you my story. The story of a woman who once stayed silent, but learned how to stand tall not through retaliation, but by walking the path she built with her own hands. I was born and raised in Bloomington, a small town in southern Indiana where winters weren't too harsh, but the chill always managed to slip through the cracks of old wooden windows and into dinner conversations. My family was the stable kind. Dad worked as an interior design engineer for a local firm. Mom taught second grade at the elementary school across the lake. Not rich, but never lacking. From the outside, we were the ideal picture, a cozy family of 4 with 2 well-behaved daughters. Except no one ever asked if I was truly well-behaved, or just trying hard enough to be quiet so I wouldn't be a burden. I was the eldest. Isabel Monroe. Quiet, book-loving, always willing to teach myself everything without being told. From the moment I could read, I spent hours sitting in the corner of the living room, under the table lamp, flipping through old comic books Mom bought at the flea market. I never needed help tying my shoelaces, never whined when I didn't get ice cream, and never threw tantrums when I was told no. I got used to doing everything on my own. So much so, it became my identity. And then there was Lily. Lily was like a spotlight. She walked into a room and everything seemed to glow brighter. 2 years younger than me, Lily had naturally curly blonde hair, wide, doll-like eyes, and a laugh my mother once called the music of life. Lily loved to sing, dance, and doodle on the walls, and every time she did, she was praised for having an artistic soul. Meanwhile, I wrote poems in my notebook and hid them under my pillow. My parents used to say, "Lily needs more attention, you're already good at everything, right, Isabel?" And me, just an 8-year-old kid, could only nod and swallow my words like a bitter candy that never had a chance to melt. I remember, when I was 9, my birthday fell on the same weekend as Lily's preschool party. My mom said, "Just hang in there this week, honey, we'll celebrate your birthday next week." That next week never came. All I got was an old book, wrapped in newspaper, left on the breakfast table. Meanwhile, Lily's birthday that year was held at the fanciest Italian restaurant in town, with her name printed on balloons, a 3-tiered cake, and a full photo shoot with a professional photographer. I wasn't jealous. I just Learn to remember the things I was supposed to forget, and erase the things I should have been allowed to hold on to. Every time I got an A+, Mom would say, "Good. You're the big sister. You're supposed to set an example." But when Lily was cast as the lead in her third-grade play, The Little Mermaid, the whole family plastered her posters on the fridge. Dad invited relatives to come watch, and Mom brought cupcakes to her class. Me? I won second place in a statewide short story contest in 6th grade. Mom just said, "That's good. But next time, try writing about something happier. Your stories are too dark." Number 4. Eventually, I realized there was only one way to be loved in our house: by being cute, bubbly, sociable, and someone to be proud of. I wasn't that kind of person. I didn't know how to put on a show. I didn't know how to be charming. And most of all, I didn't know how to make them see that I mattered. I started living in a silence that no one asked for, but everyone expected. If I was good, I should handle things myself. If I was sad, I was just too sensitive. I stepped back so Lily could shine. I gave in, even when I didn't want to. I accepted it, even when it hurt. Everything inside me slowly turned into a hollow space, not because someone took something away, but because no one ever left anything behind. Once, I asked my mother why my birthdays were always simpler than Lily's. She smiled. "Because you don't need flashy things. You're practical." But does being practical mean you deserve less love? By the time I was in 10th grade, Lily had become the centerpiece of every proud parent's story. Winning the cheerleading award, getting elected student body vice president, snapping pictures with the mayor during an environmental campaign. And me? I joined the literature club, wrote my own articles, printed a small newsletter, and pinned it on the library bulletin board. No one noticed. No one asked. I wasn't the one they looked forward to seeing at parent-teacher meetings. I was just the one they assumed would be fine. And maybe because they were so sure I would be fine, they never once asked if I actually was. And when you live in silence long enough, there comes a moment when you realize you don't need to scream anymore. You just need to leave. But I didn't leave. Not then. I stayed. Because I still believed that one day they would see me. I still thought, if I just tried a little harder, maybe it would finally be my turn to be celebrated. But I was wrong. And that day, the day every last hope was crushed, would come in the most brutal way. That night, a light rain fell. The first drizzle of April tapped softly against the windows, like whispers no one could quite make out. My parents' house glowed warmly, decorated with purple orchids and gentle candlelight, ready for my mother's 55th birthday celebration. Nearly the entire extended family was there: uncles, aunts, cousins who'd flown in from out of town. Lily, of course, was the main organizer. She floated through the house in an elegant white dress, a clipboard in hand, her smile always camera-ready. Everyone kept praising her for being so grown-up, so graceful, a natural at planning events. And me? I stood in the kitchen corner, arranging desserts on a plate. No one asked for me. I didn't blame her. Truly. I had long grown used to being the quiet shadow trailing behind her light. I wore a dark blue dress that night, simple, unremarkable, and told myself, as long as Mom is happy. Tonight was about her, not about fairness. How many times had I told myself that? I didn't even know anymore. Dinner unfolded with laughter, clinking wine glasses, and the rich aroma of Mom's favorite lasagna. I sat in the middle of the long table, directly across from Lily. Mom sat at the head, holding Dad's hand, her gaze soft and glowing. I had just reached for a serving of vegetables when Lily's voice rang out, light and playful, like she was telling a harmless joke. My sister's always been like that, the silent failure of the family. Everything froze for a second. The quiet clink of chopsticks against bowls, a chair sliding slowly. Someone chuckled under their breath. Someone cleared their throat. Someone I remember clearly nodded slightly, as if the words were an undeniable truth. My father smiled vaguely but said nothing. My mother stared into her wine glass, lips curved in a quiet smirk. No one spoke up for me. No one said, "Lily, that's not okay." No one said, "Don't joke like that." No one took my side. They just let the words hang in the air like a wound no one cared to bandage because they had long accepted its presence. I looked Lily in the eye. She smiled, unaware or pretending not to know that she had just carved a deep wound into my heart. No cruelty, just casual indifference. But cruel enough. I stood up, slowly, reached for a napkin to wipe my mouth. Conversation resumed around me, as if a chair had shifted, nothing more. I walked down the hallway and turned left into the downstairs bathroom. I closed the door, didn't turn on the light. I leaned my forehead against the mirror. In the dim shadows, my reflections stared back blurry, unclear like my place in this family. A warm pressure wrapped around my throat, like an invisible scarf tightening gently. I whispered, barely audible. They don't see me, maybe, they never have. I turned on the faucet, washed my face, dried my hands slowly just to keep from crying. Then I sat on the tiny windowsill in the bathroom, arms wrapped around a cushion, as if holding myself together. Laughter from the dining room echoed in, distorted and off-key, like an old song warped by time, familiar, but painful to hear. I stayed there for nearly 20 minutes. No one came, no one called. No one asked, "Where's Isabel?" When I returned to the table, the birthday cake had already been cut. Mom was beaming, Dad pouring more wine for the guests. Lily was taking selfies with two of our younger cousins. I sat down as if I'd never left. Mom turned to me and asked softly, "Where were you?" "I almost cut the cake without you." I just replied, "Sorry, I wasn't feeling well." She nodded and didn't ask anything more. I quietly ate my slice of cake, then helped clear the dishes like I always did. When someone sitting nearby asked how I'd been, I replied, "Still working in New York." They nodded and quickly turned to Lily. "We heard you're about to lead a media campaign in Boston." "That's amazing," my sister beamed. "Yes. I'm flying out next week." That night, back in my hotel room, I sat upright on the bed, staring out the window at the city lights. I didn't cry, I didn't get angry, I just felt empty. Lily's words echoed in my mind like a sharp needle on repeat. The silent failure of the family. Over and over again. Like a label they'd stamped on my forehead years ago, now spoken aloud with crystal clarity. But that night, I made a decision. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to beg anyone to see me. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need anyone to correct the record. I only needed one thing. To make that statement wrong. And the only way to do that was silence. Not the silence of someone who surrenders, but the silence of someone who is walking step by step out of the shadow of a family that never saw her. And writing her own place into the world. A place that no one could deny. A place no one could ever call a failure. A name no one would laugh at again. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to answer them. I'd simply stand up, in a room full of people, and let them understand on their own. I left Indiana on a Sunday morning that was sunny, yet bitterly cold. No one saw me off. No one did, because no one knew I was leaving, and I didn't bother to tell them. I wasn't running away. I was simply letting go of a place that hadn't felt like home in a very long time. In my old suitcase were a few office outfits, a stack of dog-eared psychology books, and an acceptance letter to a graduate program in applied psychology in New York, a letter I had received 2 days after the failure dinner. The room I rented was on the 3rd floor of a crumbling building in Brooklyn. The walls were cracked, the faucet leaked, the power outlets flickered, and, in winter, the wind pierced through the window frame like needles. The landlord was a widowed man from Pakistan who didn't ask questions. He only said, "I don't allow late rent, but if you need an extra blanket, I have one." I thanked him. And I began my new life on dinners of cheap sandwiches and restless sleep under dim yellow streetlights. During the day, I studied in the university library. At night, I worked at a coffee shop 3 subway stops from home. I brewed lattes, wiped tables, and took orders with a smile I tried hard to keep polite. I thought I knew what exhaustion was. But it's only when you work a 6-hour evening shift, take the 1 a.m. train home, shower in cold water because the heater broke, then sit down at 2 a.m. to finish your group psychology rebuttal that you truly understand the meaning of disciplined exhaustion. I lived in a strange rhythm. No one called, no one asked, no one cared how I survived each day. Only one person texted me every week without fail, Miss Thompson, my 12th grade English teacher. Her first message arrived on a Wednesday night. I heard about the dinner. Are you okay? I stared at that message for a long time. I didn't reply right away. My eyes burned, but something inside me softened. She didn't say much. She didn't judge. She just sent one message each week, without fail. Sometimes it was, "Are you getting enough sleep?" Other times, "I just read this article and thought of you." I never told her everything. But somehow, she always seemed to know what I needed, not advice, but a quiet place to lean. One day, she wrote, "Isabel, you once said you wanted something more than just surviving, remember?" I replied, "Yes. But I don't know where to start." She sent back a link. Women Lead Forward, a leadership training program for women who had been overlooked. I cried when I read the tagline. The program only accepted 12 women per year. I didn't expect anything, but I applied anyway. I wrote as if every sentence was a breath I was reclaiming. I wrote about a childhood where being already good enough meant being forgotten. About that empty chair at the dinner table. About the cold brick wall in my Brooklyn room, where I studied alone each night. I didn't write hoping to be chosen. I wrote because, for the first time in my life, I wanted to speak fully without being interrupted. 2 weeks later, I got an email. The first line read, "We are deeply moved by your story, Isabel." I didn't believe it. I read it 3 times. My hands trembled as I hit reply. And that morning, when I stepped out of the coffee shop, the sky over New York was gray and heavy, but something inside me had begun to shine. Still, not everyone thought it was good news. When I called home to share it, my mother only said, "Leadership? Who would you ever lead?" My father growled. "So you've finally given up on stability, huh?" Lily sent a single text. "Stop trying so hard. Not everyone is meant for the spotlight." I turned off my phone. I didn't respond, and I didn't cry anymore. For the first time, their rejection didn't shake me. I didn't need them to believe in me. I only needed to believe in myself. But those words still echoed in me as I entered the first week of the training program. I felt lost among the other participants, accomplished women with titles, resumes, and networks. I sat at the end of the table, always with a pen in hand, always taking notes, terrified of being called on. I didn't dare mention that I'd brewed coffee just the night before, that I still wore secondhand clothes, that I'd eaten instant noodles 3 meals in a row last week. One Friday afternoon, the mentors asked, "Share a moment when you felt silenced, when your voice didn't matter." I hadn't planned to speak. But then, I thought of Lily. Of the chopstick tapping the edge of the bowl. Of my mother's eyes, fixed on her wine glass instead of on me. And I raised my hand. I spoke. I didn't cry, I didn't stutter. I told my story in a low, steady voice. And when I finished, the room was silent. The lead mentor, a consultant who once taught at Harvard, looked at me and said, "You're not here to learn how to lead. You're here to remember that you've been leading yourself for a very long time." Life was still hard after that. I still worked extra shifts, still hand-washed laundry on Sundays, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer the Isabel who feared being seen. I was the Isabel who had begun to look directly at herself. And when you begin to truly face yourself, you realize no one can call you a failure unless you hand them the right to do so. I don't give that right to anyone anymore, not even to my family, not even to Lily. Because from the moment I walked out of that house and stepped into that little room in Brooklyn, I chose once and for all to see myself. And that was the day I stopped waiting for anyone else to do it for me. The months that followed in the leadership program felt like a cleansing, a rebirth. I was no longer the girl sitting silently at the end of the table. I began asking questions, offering feedback, sharing my experience not as a victim but as someone who had survived. The course focused on emotional leadership, something I once believed I lacked, having grown up in a family where emotions were something to control, never to express. But it turned out, I had the capacity to feel others deeply because I had been the one ignored for so long. I realized, those who know what silence feels like, know best how to hear voices that are being silenced. In one workshop, we were asked to write a free-form essay on the topic, "Where does leadership begin within you?" I went home, sat by the window of that old room, watching the streetlight reflections dance on the gray wall. And I wrote. I titled it, "The Unseen Daughters, on Being Invisible in Your Own Family." I didn't try to sound poetic. I simply told the truth, cold and gentle at the same time. I wrote about the forgotten birthday gift, the empty seat at the table, the party where 47 people witnessed a joke that was more like a sentence and no one objected. I didn't write to blame anyone. I wrote so that those who've lived like I did would feel less alone. At first, the essay was shared only in class, but a classmate, who was also a journalist, asked to publish it on her personal blog. I agreed on one condition: not a single word could be changed. 2 weeks later, the essay had over 1 million views. I didn't know why it had gone viral, but I knew one thing for sure. There were far too many people who had lived in the shadows, had been called strong so you don't need help, had been labeled the disappointment without ever being given the chance to prove otherwise. Messages from strangers poured in. Things like, "Thank you for writing what I never dared to say," or, "I cried because someone finally understands." A professor from my old school emailed to say he'd printed out the essay to use in his family psychology class. A woman from Texas wrote, "Can you help me talk to my daughter? I'm afraid I may have made her feel this way too." I began getting invitations to speak on small podcasts about healing, about leading from within pain. I spoke with hosts I used to admire through blurry Zoom screens, still with my homemade tea and the old laptop borrowed from the university library. No studio, no spotlight. But there was listening. And trust. One early September afternoon, I received an invitation to join as a psychological advisor for a support group of women who had experienced emotional abuse in marriage and family life. The group's coordinator was a mother of 3 who had fled her husband after 10 years of living under constant disregard. She had read my essay and tracked me down by every means she could. When I asked, "Why me?" she simply answered, "Because you don't just understand the theory. You've lived it." And then, I began to shape something I had never dared to imagine before, a small organization of my own. Not to rescue anyone, but to create a space for women who had once been ignored, labeled failures, constantly compared, or told to toughen up, to pause and finally be seen. I called it the Second Daughter Project. A small project, no big budget, no corporate sponsors, no flashy banners. Just weekly Saturday night Zoom gatherings. A private support group for people too afraid to say their real names. A free Google Doc toolkit to help rewrite your personal manifesto if you've ever been misdefined by someone else. I didn't promote it much. But they came, one by one. A 2-3-year-old girl who had just left a toxic household. A 4-1-year-old woman who had never once heard her mother say, "I'm proud of you." Teachers, nurses, students, stay-at-home, moms, lawyers, people who seemed fine on the outside, but were quietly surviving with a hollow space inside them called "I was never seen." We didn't call ourselves victims. We were simply those who had not been heard, and now we were learning how to listen to ourselves. I no longer trembled when someone asked, "What do you do?" I looked up and answered clearly, "I'm the founder of the Second Daughter Project." Because I understand, if you've ever been the one left behind, dismissed, labeled a failure, then there's nothing more powerful, more beautiful, than coming back not to explain but to build something of your own. No explanations. No justifications. No apologies for existing the way you do. And that's when I knew. I was no longer living to be validated. I was living to never abandon myself again. One January morning, I was brewing tea in my tiny kitchen when the email chime rang out. Nothing unusual. I received dozens of emails daily, from project members, podcast hosts, people wanting to share their stories. But this time, the subject line on my laptop screen made me freeze. Keynote Speaking Invitation International Women's Leadership Conference 2025. I thought it was a mistake. Or spam. My hand hovered midair, the teapot tilting slightly, hot water spilling out, but I didn't notice. I clicked the email. We are honored to invite you, Isabel Monroe, to be the keynote speaker at the annual International Women's Leadership Conference in Boston. After reading your essay, The Unseen Daughters, and witnessing the impact of the Second Daughter Project, the organizing committee believes your story and journey will be a powerful source of inspiration for the thousands of women attending. I read it again. A second time. A third. Then I sat down, pressing the palm of my hand against my chest, just to make sure my heart was still beating steadily. I thought of the nights I spent writing that essay in the dark, with only a dim desk lamp and the sound of subway trains rumbling through Brooklyn. I thought of the piece that changed my life, and now, was bringing me to a stage I never dared to dream of. I said yes. Of course I did. But not right away. It took me a full day to find the courage to hit send on the reply. Not because I doubted myself, but because I understood, stepping onto that stage, I was no longer speaking just for me. I was speaking for the hundreds of unseen daughters like me. And that required a kind of bravery unlike anything I'd ever written before. A week later, I received the official guest list from the organizers to prepare the speaker introductions. I scanned the names: founders, professors, psychologists, social activists. Each name was accompanied by a photo, a title, an affiliation. And then, near the bottom of the page, I saw it. Lily Monroe, Campaign Director, WME Foundation. I froze. Her name, bold and sharp, pinned me in place for a moment that felt longer than time itself. My throat tightened. My hand clenched slightly on the mouse, the screen trembled just a little. It wasn't a mistake. Not someone with the same name, not a coincidence. It was my sister. She would also be there. Also a guest. Also seated in that auditorium, unaware that the woman who would walk out from backstage, hold the microphone, and speak before thousands, was the silent failure she once named. I wasn't sure what my first emotion was. Not anger, not exactly fear, just a terrifying kind of stillness. A stillness I'd known before, like the one I felt walking out of the bathroom after my mother's birthday dinner. As if the universe itself had quietly closed a circle I didn't need to force shut. 3 days later, I received a text from an unknown number. No name saved. But I knew instantly who it was. You know, don't you? Just 3 words. But heavier than any others. I stared at it for a long time. The phone buzzed gently on the table. A part of me wanted to reply. Another part just wanted to delete it, as if there had never been a place where Lily and I once intersected. I set the phone down, turned off the screen, and chose silence. Because this time, I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need confrontation. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to walk anyone through a journey I took alone. All I needed was to stand on that stage. Tell the story truthfully, not to accuse, but to illuminate. Not for Lily, but for everyone like me. The ones erased from the family portrait who kept walking anyway. And if a glance happens to land on me while I'm speaking, if a face happens to bow in silence, it won't be because I shamed them. It'll be because, at last, the truth has found its place. Without permission. Without apology. And that is the real turning point. Not because I was chosen, but because, for the first time, I chose myself. And the rest of the world is simply arriving late. At exactly 8 p.m., the lights in the hall come up. The audience rows are packed, a soft murmur fills the space, cameras flash, and the opening music plays gentle but ceremonious. From behind the curtain, I can see everything: the front row reserved for special guests, name cards neatly placed atop white linens, and in the 6th seat from the left, I see Lily. My sister was dressed in a cream blazer, her blonde hair softly curled and tucked neatly behind her ear. She was speaking with an older woman, her expression composed, chin slightly raised, the same posture I had seen 100 times at the events she organized. But today, that gaze was about to meet something she never expected. The public, undeniable presence of the sister she once erased from the family map. I stood behind the stage curtain, my heart beating slow but steady. No more trembling, no more nerves. Just a quiet certainty, like the echo of a bell ringing far away after a storm has passed. A backstage crew member gave the signal. I nodded and stepped forward just as the MC finished. And now, please welcome to the stage, the founder of the Second Daughter Project, author of the viral essay, The Unseen Daughters, that has touched the hearts of over 1 million readers worldwide. Our keynote speaker today, Isabel Monroe. The applause began. Scattered at first, then swelling into a steady roar. I walked out to center stage. The spotlight hit me full in the face, and for a moment, everything in the front row blurred. But I still saw one face clearly, Lily's. She looked up, eyes wide, lips slightly parted. In that instant, her expression shifted, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally froze in stunned silence. I didn't look long. I didn't need anything from her. I turned my gaze toward the audience and began. Good morning. My name is Isabel Monroe. I was once called the silent disappointment of my family. And as it turns out, that was a gift in disguise. No one laughed. No murmurs, just a silence so full it felt like a blank page, waiting for truth to be written on it. I continued. I was born the eldest daughter in a family where silence was considered a virtue, and independence was mistaken for not needing love. I grew up hearing things like, "You're already good, you don't need more praise," and "You're strong enough, so let your sister shine." I wasn't hit, I wasn't scolded, but I was never really seen. I spoke of the birthday gift wrapped in newspaper, of the empty chair at the family gathering, of the moment I left home and no one stopped me. I never used names, never pointed fingers. But each sentence pulled the audience back into their own childhoods, back to the quiet places where they once sat, wishing someone would ask, "Are you okay?" And no one ever did. I spoke of New York, of peeling walls and cold water showers, of working shifts until 1 a.m. and then coming home to write scholarship applications, of building a life not to prove I was good enough but to survive the belief that I never would be. And then, I wrote an essay, just to find my voice again. But I never imagined that essay would become the voice of thousands of others. I looked around the auditorium, some were wiping away tears. Others sat upright, as if they too had once been called invisible. I continued. I'm not standing here to seek revenge. I'm not saying these things to make anyone bow their head. I'm here to tell you, if you've ever been cut out of the family picture simply because you didn't fit, you were never the problem. You were just placed in the wrong frame. I spoke about the Second Daughter Project, about the women who had learned how to come home to themselves, about a generation of second daughters, not chosen, but still here, still radiant, still whole without anyone's approval. I'm not standing here because someone gave me an opportunity. I'm here because I stopped asking for permission to exist. When I finished, there was no sound at first. Just a held breath, stretched across the room. And then, like a flood breaking loose, the applause erupted. A few stood. Then a row. Then the whole room. The sound thundered against the walls, rising to the vaulted ceiling. I didn't smile, I didn't cry, I just stood there still, steady, and unmistakably present. I glanced at the front row. Lily was still seated, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. She wasn't clapping. But her eyes couldn't hide. She looked down not in defeat, but because, at last, she saw me. Without introduction, without anyone pointing. The truth, when spoken from the heart, doesn't need to shout, it carries itself. And today, it spoke for me. All I had to do was stand there, as living proof that someone once labeled the silent disappointment could be the one who made the entire hall rise. Not for revenge, but because the truth always has a place as long as you don't give up before it arrives. After the speech, I left the stage in silence. Not because no one called out, but because I didn't want to get swept into the swirl of compliments, handshakes, or repeated thank yous. I needed a few minutes to breathe, to return to myself. I walked down the hallway on the left side of the auditorium, a quieter wing with white walls, high ceilings, and soft recessed lighting that gave me a small cocoon to step back into. I stood there, leaning against the wall, eyes closed. My heart no longer pounded like it had on stage. Everything now was simply calm. A peace I had taken far too long to find. And then, the soft click of heels echoed down the corridor behind me. I opened my eyes. Lily stood there. Her eyes were red. She still held the notebook I was certain she hadn't written a single word in. Her gaze met mine like it had just passed through a fog, no longer proud, no longer certain. Just something fragile and sincere. "You knew I'd be here?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. I looked at her, no flinching, no surprise, and answered slowly, "Number. But you saw me now, didn't you?" Lily bit her lower lip and nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I didn't know. I never imagined. How did you become this strong?" I tilted my head slightly. Not smiling, but not cold either. "Since the day you called me the disappointment of the family. And no one stood up for me." Lily lowered her head, clutching the notebook tightly. After a moment, she looked up, her lips trembling. "I'm sorry. I never understood, not until today." I exhaled gently. Not because of her apology, but because I realized I no longer needed it. I looked at her, my voice calm. "I don't need an apology. I need acknowledgement from you. And you did that when you lowered your head." Lily looked at me, eyes glistening. She opened her mouth to say something but couldn't form the words. I stepped forward, not close, just enough for us to stand side by side, no one ahead. No one left behind. "Lily," I said softly, "I'm not angry with you. I never truly was. You only did what everyone else in our family has always done, looked at me, but never really saw me. But today, you did. And that is enough." Her eyes shimmered. For the first time, they weren't proud or polished but honest, in a way that felt new and real. "I always thought you didn't need anyone. You were so strong. I didn't understand that. You had to be strong because no one ever asked if you were okay." I nodded gently. "Exactly. I used to think, if I were good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, one day, I'd be chosen. But no. Sometimes, it's not about being enough. It's about the fact that they already chose someone else. And you're just out of view." Lily clenched her fists, eyes red again, then blurted out, "From now on, if anyone asks who I admire most, I won't say celebrities anymore, I'll say it's you." I didn't respond. I just placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. "I don't need to be admired," I said. "I just need you to understand, no one has the right to define someone else as a failure, not even family." We stood there for a few minutes more. No more words, no need for a hug. No dramatic reconciliation. Because sometimes, forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a process. And today, that process had begun not with words, but with a look. With acknowledgement. With the bowed head of someone who once looked down on another and now was learning to see them eye to eye. I walked away first. Not to leave her behind, but because I knew, this time, Lily wouldn't let herself remain behind. And neither would I. I no longer needed anyone to walk with me because I had learned how to stand alone, and from that moment on, I had nothing left to prove. I only needed to be myself. And for the first time, that was enough. I returned to New York on a softly raining afternoon. The city was still loud, exhausting, and crowded as always, but inside me, something had changed. Not peace, something fuller. Wholeness. For the first time in years, I walked into my tiny apartment without feeling like anything was missing. I didn't need anyone to greet me. I didn't need arms around me. Because now, I knew I had finally come home to the only place I truly belonged, myself. My workspace is still the same. The white porcelain teacup still rests in the corner of the desk, The bookshelf is packed with project files, and sticky notes are scattered everywhere. But there's one new thing: a photo frame hanging on the wall, right above my simple wooden desk. The photo was taken during the speech. I'm standing at center stage, holding the microphone, the spotlight illuminating my shoulder. But what makes it special is what's in the background: blurred rows of audience seats, and among those faces, one person is looking up at me, her gaze quiet but deeply present. It's Lily. I sit down and open the journal I've carried with me since the earliest days in New York. The pages are yellowed, the handwriting slanted and crossed out in places. I flip to the final page. Black ink stands out beneath the pen tip. You don't need to be chosen to succeed. You just need to choose yourself so you don't disappear. I close the journal and place it on the shelf. There's nothing more I need to write. Because everything I ever needed to say I've said. And everything I once struggled to prove I now live. If you've ever been called a burden, a disappointment, someone not good enough. If you've ever sat quietly at a family dinner, hearing your name turned into a punchline, and no one stood up for you. If you've ever had to leave home not to chase something grand, but simply to be yourself. Remember this. You don't need to scream. You don't need to beg to be seen. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love. Let your silence, your steadiness, your persistence, your quiet light speak for you. Because real light never needs permission. It only needs you not to put it out.